Hi, I'm Mal and welcome to another episode of MiniModelMakes. In today's episode I'm going to paint up for you a squig. Now I recently was lucky enough to get the new Beast Snaggas boys for 40k, and I thought that the basher squig that the knob rides would be the perfect thing to practice on and do a little tutorial. Now while I'm painting a 40k squig, this is equally applicable to any of the Gloomspite Squigs from Age of Sigmar, or for all you old people out there, Night Goblin squig hoppers or herders. So without much further ado, let's crack on and start this painting tutorial. Welcome to my video on how to paint squigs. For this video I have picked the Smasher squig from the new Beast Snaggas Ork set that was released recently from Games Workshop. To begin with, I have base coated my squig with Xandriust spray. I've not put him on his base. I've currently got him attached with some white tack to a handle. This is so it makes it easier to reach his belly, which I'll show you very shortly. So for our first stage, I am going to use Mephiston red paint. Mix that up on my palette. Make sure you add water to this to thin the coats down. You can use multiple coats, is better than one single thick coat for this. And what we're going to do, you don't have to worry too much about his saddle or teeth or the metal areas, but if you get some red on them it doesn't matter. And I'm going to paint all the areas of the skin, including the underneath, in this red. I'm just using a regiment brush from Army Painter for this. As you can see, it's well used, but for this job it's perfect. We don't have to be too neat. So I'm going to carry on painting our squig and I'll come back to you when I'm on to the next step. So we've got a lovely layer of Mephiston red on our squig. What I'm now going to do is we're going to use some Rakarth flesh, a dry brush and some paper towel. Get some of the Rakarth flesh onto our dry brush. Make sure you're getting most of it off, and then very gently we're going to dry brush sort of the bottom third of the squig. Just going to work that colour up. Remember, you don't need to get too much onto your brush. Having a small amount and some gentle dry brushing is better. It's better to take your time with this. On the back of this squig you've got a nice area in which you can follow with the tail. And you just keep working up to the underbelly and just keep dry brushing on there. It doesn't matter if you get some onto the red areas. I'm just going to get some more of that Rakarth flesh onto my dry brush. Make sure as well as the belly you get in under the neck here. Really building up that paler area. As I said, it doesn't really matter if you get too much on the red. We're going to go back into this just stippling it into that neck area there. This is why I've not put the base on the model, so we can get into this area a lot easier, which we wouldn't have been able to do. And we're just building up a nice gradual dry brush on the body of the actual squig itself. What I'll do is I'll finish off this layer here and I'll tidy it up with the Mephiston red, and then we'll get back to the next stage after that. So I've changed the water in my pot, and we're now using Rakarth flesh. What I'm going to do is just strengthen the colour of the underbelly, and all I'm doing is just going for the centre of the areas and just using that Rakarth flesh just to make it a little bit stronger in the centre of the model. I'm not worrying too much about these outer edges because that's sort of showing a natural blend between the paler underbelly and the red of the actual skin itself. All I'm doing is just making a line going down the body and under the tail, just in the very centre, and then reinforcing the colour just under the chin of the squig there. Just going sort of out to about this point, and as that dries, that'll just strengthen the colour we've got there, but still leave this little transition on the outer edges of it to make it appear a little bit more natural. That's it, so I'm just going to tidy that up a tiny bit more and we'll move on to the next stage. So the Rakarth flesh is dried and just helped to reinforce the colours at the centre of the squig's belly. What I'm going to do now is tie it in, or the colours in, even more together. I'm going to give it an Agrax Earthshade wash. This is all over the model, so just almost straight from the pot, or you can pop it onto your palette and then put the lid back on your pot, because the amount of Agrax I spill, I'd hate to think how much I spend on it. All we're going to do is just cover the model now with the Agrax Earthshade. Make sure you're getting every crevice of the model. Loads of wonderful detail on these squig models. They're absolutely amazing to paint. I'm actually thinking after I've finished this unit, I'm going to get some more squigs, maybe paint up some of what was the old Night Goblins Squig Riders. I think they'd be amazing models to paint as well, the Gloomspite Gitz. I'm having tons of fun with these squigs. So, just going to cover the model liberally in the wash. Keep an eye on it, make sure it doesn't pool in the raised areas. Although it's not the end of the world if it does, because of the stage that we're going to go to next. What I will do is I'm going to finish off this model. We'll move on to the next stage and I will get back to you then. Agrax Earthshade has now dried on the model. What we're going to do now is start bringing up the colour again with some more dry brushing. For this, I'm going back to my Fist on Red. I've got a small makeup brush here, and same as before, got my kitchen towel, wiping off most of the paint, and then I'm going to gently work on all this wonderful texture here. That's on the squig, paying attention to all the raised areas. The facial features are so good on these models, they're really animated, really nice models to paint. Working along the skin now. See, I've not done the metal areas yet because I'm still dry brushing, so I'll save the metal areas till after we've done all the dry brush of the squig skin. So just bringing up that detail back into the areas of the skin. You can see the variations. What I'm going to do is I'm going to carry on, finish off all of that model, and then we'll move on to the next step. I've finished dry brushing the Mephisto on Red back onto the squig to bring up that wonderful deep rich red colour that we're working on. I'm now going to do another highlight using Evil Sun's Scarlet. Same as before, with your dry brush or makeup brush, whatever you want to get. Just picking up all that lovely raised detail, bit of a lighter dry brush than before, concentrating on those raised areas of skin, trying to leave some of the recesses, and just working up all that wonderful colour. We're now getting to get a really vibrant traditional squig red. I'm going to carry on with that all over the body of this squig and face, and we'll move on to the next stage shortly. Once more, we're going to touch up the underbelly of the squig, and I'm moving back again to Rakarth flesh and a dry brush, and I'm just going to bring up the colour of the underbelly again. It's just really taking your time, having a little bit of patience. Really does work wonders with this. Try to be more careful this time and not to get any of the Rakarth flesh onto the red areas we've worked on. I'm going to carry on with this area. I'm going to move up towards the tail. I'll finish off that layer and we'll move on. So once again, the dry brush is complete there on the belly, and I'm just going to use a little bit of the watered down Rakarth flesh just to layer up in the centre of this model. Keeping a really thin layer will help to make the coloration seem natural on the base of the model while maintaining the blend. So at the minute the colour's quite strong, but it will dry very subtly because we've taken the time to water down that paint to the point where as it dries it'll become sort of more translucent. That's the whole point to layering, and something I didn't really figure out too much when I was wrestling with getting good at paint. I mean, I'm not the world's best painter, certainly not, but I've improved quite a bit over the past few years, which is good, to the point where I actually feel comfortable doing these videos. But it's working with these thinner layers and getting the confidence to actually work with and leave these layers to dry and see the subtle blends that you can actually get by doing this, which you can only really do with experience and over time, learning your craft of painting. So I'm going to let that area dry. That should be, as it dries, should become more natural, leave more of that transition. And we've built up a nice colour there to work with. It shows a bit of variation in the model, and even though it's going to be on the base of the model, it's still an area of interest where as you're looking sort of at the front of the model you'll get that paler area, draws your eye, makes the model look more appealing. So I'm just going to finish off that area, let it dry up, and we'll move on to the next part. So we're going to carry on with that subtle blending, layering of the belly area, and I'm going to move on to pallid witch flesh now. Same thing again, really watered down pallid witch flesh, and we're looking at more of these raised areas here, such as under the neck, and the larger areas of the belly. If you look very carefully you can sort of see some raised areas and folds. Just sort of follow those areas of the model and working your way down the tail. As I said, it looks quite bright at the moment, but because we've watered down these layers, watered down this paint so much, it will dry a little bit more transparent and help to create that natural tone under the belly of the squig. So we've finished off that area of the pale underbelly now. I'm going to work on the metal areas around the squig, and I'm just using good old lead belcher this time, just to pick out all the metal areas, being careful to not try and get any on the skin. We've got the area of the plate on top of the head. Depending on how you've made this squig, there are actually quite a few different areas. There's these metal piston areas here by the neck, and on this one he has got a cybernetic leg. So I'll be pecking out the area here around the thigh and moving down to this area here, and then on the back there's another contraption here and another one on his neck here. So I am going to work on all these areas and then I'll get back onto the next stage. So I've picked out the metal areas, and I've also highlighted another couple of areas in Retributor armour, just to make them look a bit different to begin with. And what we're going to do now is go back to our amazing friend Agrax Earthshade, and we're just going to wash up those metal areas to give them some definition. So once again, just go over the metal areas of the model with our Agrax. Most importantly, the head plate of the Squig, because that's going to be such a dominant area of the model and is going to draw attention. Make sure we give that a good wash. And then also any of the cybernetic parts you put onto your Squig. I'm going to finish off these areas and we'll move on to the next stage. So we've washed all the metal areas. What I'm going to do now is pick out the areas of the saddle and the straps on the Squig. I am using Rhinox hide. Once more, popped it on a palette and watered it down, and just going to pick out the straps and then work up onto the saddle area of the model as well. So I'm going to cover that area. It might need a couple of coats because it's quite thin, but once more I'm building up that colour. I'm going to finish those areas now and I'll get back to you on the next stage. Our next step now is to use some Wild Rider Red. We're watering it down, and what we're looking for now is just to accentuate some of this amazing detail to the model. So we're looking at these sort of raised areas here, around and under the eyes, and the sort of harder crests around the ears. Looking for places like sort of that top lip there and around the nose, filling in these areas. So once again, this will sort of dry kind of translucent, so it won't be as stark as the probably shows on camera because of the wetness. Look at places like along these crests. And we're just going to work our way around places like the jawline here. Don't worry too much about that lower lip. We've got plans for that in a later stage. So yeah, just carrying on with these little raised areas. When they dry, they'll make the model really pop. I'm gonna work around the legs as well. Got these raised areas here on the legs. can put a bit onto the heavily muscled areas like the thigh as well. And you can also run along the edge of this tail. Same again on this side. As I say, make sure you really do water down your layers to a level that you are comfortable working with. I'm amazed by some of these painters who are almost painting glazes onto models. It's a skill I don't have. I really wish I did. But as I said, these Squig models are amazing. They're absolutely packed with detail, so it'd be a crime not to do something with that detail. Just trying to make sure I keep it in shot. So I'm just going to work my way around the model, keep working on and picking out those areas till I've got them how I want them, and then we'll move on to the next stage. While dried red is dry, I'm now going to work on the bottom lip. What I'm using for that is Cadian Flesh Tone. Once again, mix your layers down with water. I'll just bring my palette across so you can actually see what I'm working with. Is my Cadian Flesh Tone. You see there sort of the consistency that it's at. All we're going to do is we're going to pick up those raised areas of the lip and I'm just going to build up the layers. It might take a couple of coats again. But less is more, and I know it's going over and going over and going over, but that's how you build up all this colour that you need with these models. I'm going to let that coat dry. I'm going to do another coat of the Cadian Flesh Tone and I'll get back to you with the next step. For the next stage, I am now going to use Druchii Violet Shade. This is being mixed on and will go over the area of the bottom lip. Just to tint that lip Start making it appear as a different colour. Tidy that up a bit. I'm then going to mix that Druchii Violet with some Lahmian Medium. Putting this on my palette. What I want to do is sort of dilute that Lahmian Medium but not take away the properties of the shade. And for this, I'm looking at the area around the metal on the head. What I want to do is give it the sort of appearance that where this has been bolted onto the Squig's head, his flesh is sort of quite angry and irritated by it. Now, I don't really want to stain the colour like we did on his lip. So that's why I've used the Lahmian Medium to make this a little bit more subtle around these raised areas. And to build up that effect. So I'm just going to carry on with this section. I'll probably put a couple of layers on that and we'll get back to you with the next stage. So the next stage now is to do a little bit more work on that bottom lip of our Squig, and we are going to be using Genestealer Purple, and you can see the wonderful texture that this lip has. We're just picking out the raised areas of the lip now with a lighter colour. Giving this feature a bit more depth. So I'm just going to keep working on this lip area, sort of putting some colour on the top and then using it to drag down. I'm just going to build up a bit stronger areas of colour on the very raised parts there. So I'll carry on with that and I'll meet you back on the next stage. With the lip done, we're now going to do some more work on that mouth. What I am going to use is Rhinox hide, and we're going to do some work on the teeth now. When doing things like bone or teeth, it always pays to go from a very dark colour through to a lighter one, especially with monsters and things with bigger teeth. because what you will try to do is to keep the base of the tooth a very dark sort of brown, and then work higher up the tooth to lighten it, and that just gives it that more sort of texture. All I'm doing here is just picking out the mouth of this squig. I'm just painting all those teeth with a thin down layer of that rhinox hide. The brown will also goes between the cracks in the teeth, so we've got that darker mouth. Okay, we'll move on to the next step. So as well as doing the teeth in the rhinox hide, just going to pick out the claws on the bottom of the feet as well, or on the one foot, because his other foot's bionic in this case. But there is the option on the model to have 2 biological feet. Next stage I'm going to do now is just using some more of that Druchii Violet we used earlier on the lip. I'm just going to work it into the deepest crevices of the model, so things like the nostril, eye sockets. There's quite a few deep crevices that this model has. What that Druchii Violet will do is it will give some quite rich tones to the darker areas. It just really works with the red that we've used on the model. Lots of wonderful deep texture to this squig that we get to use, which is amazing really. Anywhere where there's cybernetics as well, just get some of that Druchii Violet in there to help with some definition. I'm going to do the same down here on the leg where it's been sort of stitched up. But just keep working your way around the model, find the sort of deepest creases, just pop a little bit of the Druchii Violet in there. When it's dry, it'll really liven the model up, liven the rich texture we've given to that skin up. So I'm going to carry on with that, and we'll carry on working our way around. The next stage is to go back to Xandri Dust, and we're doing some more work on the teeth. So with that Xandri Dust, leaving the base of the tooth brown where it meets the gum. We're just gently working those teeth. Now, if you get Xandri Dust in between the teeth, it's okay. At the end of it, just wash back over it with Agrax Earthshade, get it into the recessed areas, and you'll be fine. But it's just taking the time just to pick out those teeth. You know, you make a mistake, just go back and correct it. I'm going to use Shabty Bone for the next stage of the teeth. Once more, pop a bit onto your palette, and we're going a little bit higher up the tooth this time, just to the top of it, and just take your time and work your way around the model. I'll carry on with the other side and move on to the next stage. And then we're using Screaming Skull. Same thing again, walk some down onto your palette. Got the mouth of our squig, and we're just sort of highlighting the very top part of the teeth. Don't worry too much if you can't get the smaller ones, just pick out the bigger teeth with that. It does, as you can see, it really does make them stand out and pop. After the mouth, I'm going to do some work on the eyes just to complete that face. I'm using Evelyn Sunset. I like my Squig's eyes to be yellow and pupilless, and it's just a case of bracing yourself really carefully and just working that yellow into that pupil. Being very careful with this because my view or to try and get it on camera, it's actually very difficult for me to paint. But I'm just going to keep being steady, building up that colour in there, and I'll get back to you when they're done. We're now going to use Uriel Yellow to strengthen the colour in those eyes. So that's one. Try and get it into focus. That's the second one. What you can do is, if you get a little bit on the face, you can use some of your Druchii Violet around the eye socket to darken it back down, or some of the original red colours. But that's its eyes done. I don't bother with pupils on Squigs. I just think they're a bit otherworldly with the pupilless eyes. Alright, I'm going to pick out the claws now once more using Xandri Dust. What I'm doing is leaving the top part of the claw brown. Just working my way along the rest of the claw to build up the colour. Like that. For the next step, I'm going to use some Karak Stone. I'm using a Wargaming Insane detail brush here, and we're just going to add a little bit of texture and life to the toenails on the model. So I've got the toenails there, and I'm just using little downward strokes. Try and get it a bit clearer for the camera. Just little downward strokes on the actual nails with the Karak Stone to give it a kind of grimy toenail texture. You can see it on that, it's hard to bring up on my rubbishy little camera, I'm afraid. But all you're doing is just stroking lines down the nail itself. For our next step, we're going to liven up the metal areas of the model. For that, I am using Ironbreaker. Now there's two ways to do this. For the first part, I'm just going to use a small dry brush, and for big areas of metal like the leg, just going to gently run that dry brush over the leg. That'll start to pick up all those raised metal areas. Try to be careful you don't go onto the red, but you can always tidy up with your red colours. So make sure you just catch the edges of those areas. And then for the smaller metal areas, just get a normal brush. Same again, get the metal off your palette. And for this, we're just adding a bit of life to the centre and raised edges of these areas. Just got to pick out the edges. If you think your dry brushing stage wasn't good enough on the leg, you can do this again to pick out, make sure these raised edges are picked out on the metal area, and we just work our way around the model. Don't forget sneaky little bits like this bit here in his hip, on the metal stitch sutures in his leg stitches, and I'll just work my way around, pick out all these areas. Don't forget his head, so you can pick out the actual rivets to make those stand out, and the edges of the metal plate. Some of these raised edges here. So I'm going to carry on with those, and I'll get back to you on the next stage. All our metal areas have been highlighted with the iron breaker, including the gold areas as well. Next I'm going to use Mournfang Brown, and we're going to do some work on the saddle. So very similar to what we have been doing with the metal areas, we're just going to water down some of that Mournfang Brown, and we're going to start picking out the edges of the saddle area with, well, it can be a thick highlight, it doesn't really matter for this bit too much. Just leaving the innermost parts of the leather strap the darker brown. Don't forget these little notches and rough areas to work on. Also on the top of the actual saddle, all the stitching as well. I'm going to highlight up, and we're just going to work around all these edges and this crease that's in the middle of the saddle here as well. Just going to build up some colour into that area there, trying to keep out of that crack. Okay, so I'll carry on with the leather area and the belt, and I'll get back to you with the next stage. For the next stage with the saddle, I'm going to use some Citadel XV88. I've watered that down onto my palette, and I'm using a character brush. And for this, I'm just picking out the very edges of the saddle, the little nicks you can see on the saddle itself. And just using this XV88 watered down as an edge highlight on certain areas. It does look quite bright, but it will, as it dries, darken a little bit. The other areas that I'm looking for on this are the stitching work on the saddle, I'm just going to work my way all around the model on the saddle areas, just picking out little select corners. As I say, the detail they've put in where they've sort of nicked the edges of the saddle itself really help you. And that'll be the saddle finished, and we'll move on to the next stage. Next stage is to use some Xerius purple, and I'm just going over some of the scales and lumps and bumps on the hide of the squig. I'll work my way around each area. Just build up the colour on these. You can leave some of these bumps the actual red colour if you want. It's just to make it sort of stand out a little bit. And sort of tie it in with the area of the lip. You don't have to go mad. I say just a few of the key parts of the model, and it's just going to help break it up. So I'm going to work my way around all these bumps here on the back of this tail and around the neck, and I'll get back to you with the next stage. Our next stage is to use Genestealer purple, and it's going back over all those little spots. You can see the ones on his leg here, and just pop in a little dot on the top, still leaving the purple bit showing underneath. It's just like the head on a spot, just a little dot of that colour as best you can in the centre of each spot. I'll work my way around the model and I'll get back to you with the next stage. Next stage now, I'm going back to the metalwork on the leg. I'm just going to use some more of the Agrax Earthshade, and I'm just going to pick out sort of the pistony areas. If you look under the leg there, just where these meet, to give it the impression that there's grease or some kind of oil or a lubricant just on these, just to help the parts move as they were in real life. Now you can go around all the joints with that. There are also different ones. There's Vallejo do an engine oil one which is quite nice, as do AK. There's loads of different paints out there, but I'm just using the Agrax because it's readily available. Games Workshop, it does a similar job, so I'm just making sure those joins are sort of picked out, and it's given the impression that there is grease, oil and lubricant on there, and it just helps the metal areas stand out a little bit as well. And that is the end of the squig. Once that's done, I'm going to mount it onto a base, and I'll show you the full squad that I've done so you can have a look. Okay, be back shortly. So I have placed the squig onto his base. I've given it a Badlands desert theme style, which you can see in another one of my videos. I've done a full tutorial on that for you. So that was my tutorial on how to paint squigs. as I explained at the beginning of the video, this technique can be used to paint any squig. It doesn't have to be for the 40k Beast Snaggas. It can be for the Gloomspite Gitz as well in Age of Sigmar, or for your night goblins, for all you older people out there, the squig hoppers and herders. I hope you enjoyed that video. Not much more to say except for please like, subscribe and share. I'm just a guy doing a little bit of hobby in his own man cave. I'm not a shop, I'm not a company, I'm not anything like that. I don't ask for money or anything, so even just clicking a like or a share is absolutely amazing and helps me tremendously. Please, if you've enjoyed this video or you've got some feedback for me, leave a comment. I read all the comments. It's amazing when people get in touch. Drop me a line, tell me where you're from. It's good when I hear from people who are the other side of the world telling me they've watched my video and it's helped them with a hobby. I really do find it brilliant and it keeps me wanting to do more of these videos. So, as I said, please like, subscribe and share. Stay safe out there and bye for now.